The text message that would destroy my life didn't come from some unknown number in the middle of the night. It didn't contain a threat or a revelation about my husband's finances. It came on a Tuesday afternoon from the one person on earth I trusted without question, and all it said was, "I need to ask you for something. It's for my birthday." That was it. That was the beginning of the end. The single thread that once pulled would unravel the entire tapestry of the life I had so carefully, so miserably woven together. If you've ever stood at a crossroads where your heart and your head are screaming different directions, then you know the silence that followed that text. Before we dive into the choice that changed everything, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to explore these impossible moments, and you won't want to miss where this journey leads. My name is Ava, and for 12 years, I had been Mrs. David Thorne. On paper, it was perfect. A stable marriage to a successful architect, a beautiful apartment in a quiet corner of the city, a life scrubbed clean of any visible drama. But beneath the surface, our home was a silent museum of a love that had died years ago. The exhibits were two people who moved around each other like ghosts. Our conversations reduced to transactional grunts about bills and groceries. David wasn't cruel. He was simply absent. An emotional vacuum who had long ago traded passion for predictability, leaving me to suffocate in the quiet. My oxygen. My only source of it was Ethan. We'd been best friends for 15 years since we were kids in college, fumbling our way through art history and cheap beer. He was the keeper of my secrets, the architect of my laughter, the only person who saw the woman I was instead of the wife I was supposed to be. His name flashing on my phone screen was a jolt of color in my grayscale world. I let the phone buzz a second longer, savoring it before answering. "Ethan," I said, and the sound of my own voice, suddenly lighter, surprised me. "Ava," he replied. His voice was different. Usually it was a warm, rumbling thing full of easy humor. Today it was tight, stretched thin over a wire of anxiety. "You got my text." I did. Gearing up for the big 3-5, I tried to keep it light, falling back on our usual banter. "Don't worry, I've already booked our usual spot for karaoke. I expect a truly terrible rendition of Don't Stop Believin'." A short, mirthless puff of air came through the phone. "That's the thing, Ava. I was hoping for something different this year. That's what I wanted to ask you about." The gift. I leaned back against the cool leather of the sofa, a prickle of unease working its way up my spine. This wasn't him. Ethan was the king of deflecting seriousness with a well-timed joke. "Okay," I said slowly, my curiosity now warring with a growing sense of dread. "I'm listening. What's on your mind?" The silence that followed was so heavy I could feel its weight pressing on my chest. I could hear the faint, unsteady rhythm of his breathing, the sound of a man standing on a ledge deciding whether to jump. My own heart started to hammer against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden quiet. Finally, he spoke, his voice a raw, trembling whisper that seemed to be scraped from the very depths of his soul. "Ava, for my birthday, I want to spend the night with you." The world tilted. The words didn't compute at first. They were just sounds disconnected from meaning. "Spend the night with me." The simple request landed in the hollow space of my apartment and detonated, shattering the fragile piece into a million pieces. This was Ethan. My Ethan. The man who had held my hand through my father's funeral, who had painted my first apartment, who had talked me down from a panic attack the night before my wedding to another man. "Spend the night?" I repeated the words, feeling foreign and clumsy on my tongue. "What? What do you mean by that?" "I think you know what I mean," he said, and now the anxiety in his voice was laced with a desperate sort of courage. "I don't want it to be weird. And God, Ava, the last thing I ever want to do is ruin this. Our friendship is the most important thing in my life. But I've been thinking, for years I've been thinking, what would it be like just once? To know. Disbelief was a physical shock, a jolt of ice water through my veins. It was quickly followed by a hot, confusing shame, but beneath it something else flickered. A tiny, dangerous ember of curiosity that I had spent years stamping out. Because I knew. Of course I knew. I wasn't that naive. I had seen it in the way his gaze would sometimes linger a second too long when he thought I wasn't looking. I had felt it in the electric current that passed between us when our hands brushed reaching for the same coffee mug. I had heard it in the quiet intensity of his voice when he'd say, "He doesn't deserve you, Ava." I had always filed these moments away, locked them in a box labeled friendship, and thrown away the key. Because I was married, because it was safe. But his request wasn't a fleeting look or an accidental touch. It was a key sliding into the lock of that forbidden box. I married Ethan. I whispered the words, tasting like a lie. The vow felt like a borrowed coat that no longer fit a promise made by a younger, more hopeful version of myself. David's face flashed in my mind, not the man I had married, but the stranger I now lived with, his back turned to me in bed, the chasm between us wider than the mattress. I know Ethan rushed to say, his voice soft and placating, as if trying to soothe a startled animal. I know that. Believe me, I wouldn't have asked if things were different, if you were happy. But are you Ava? Are you really? The question hung in the air, merciless and true. Was I happy? I was surviving. I was managing. I was performing the role of a contented wife while my soul was slowly starving to death. Ethan wasn't just asking for a night of intimacy. He was holding up a mirror to my life, and I couldn't stand the reflection. The hollow ache in my chest, the profound, soul-crushing loneliness that had become my constant companion, he saw it all. And in that moment, the thought of being seen, truly seen, was more tempting than any physical desire. My hand trembled as I gripped the phone. "Let me think about it." I heard myself say, the voice distant as if belonging to someone else. I need a minute to process this. Of course, he said, relief washing through his tone. Take all the time you need. I booked a room for tomorrow night. Just in case you say yes. He gave me the name of a boutique hotel downtown, a place I'd never heard of, small and discreet. As we hung up, I stared at the blank screen of my phone, my reflection a pale, shocked face. He had booked a room. The certainty of it, the planning, sent another shockwave through me. This wasn't a whim. This was a calculated move born from years of unspoken longing. That night, the silence in our apartment was louder than ever. David came home late as usual, dropping his briefcase by the door with a heavy thud that made me jump. He mumbled a greeting as he passed me in the hallway, his eyes already on his laptop, his mind miles away in a world of blueprints and deadlines. "How was your day?" I asked, my voice small. "Fine. Busy," he said, not looking up. We ate dinner in our customary silence, the clinking of our forks against the plates, the only conversation. I watched him across the table, trying to find a flicker of the man I had fallen in love with. The man who once brought me wildflowers, who once held me and whispered that we could take on the world together. He was gone. In his place was a polite, distant roommate I happened to share a bed with. Later, as I lay in that bed, the space between us, a cold, empty canyon, Ethan's words echoed in my head. "Are you happy?" The question wasn't an accusation. It was an invitation. An invitation to be honest with myself for the first time in a very long time. And the honest answer was no. I was profoundly, achingly unhappy. The loneliness wasn't just about the lack of physical intimacy. It was the total absence of connection. I felt invisible. Ethan's request was a spark in the darkness. It was terrifying, reckless, and wrong on every conceivable level, but it was also the first time in years anyone had made me feel wanted. Not needed to pay a bill or find a missing sock, but truly deeply wanted. The thought of his eyes on me, full of the warmth and adoration I saw in them even during our most platonic moments, was a siren song I wasn't sure I had the strength to resist. The choice wasn't about sex. It was about feeling alive again. The next day passed in a blur of anxiety and anticipation. I moved through my tasks like an automaton, my mind a battlefield of guilt, desire, loyalty, and longing. By 5 o'clock I had made my decision, or perhaps my heart had made it for me the moment I heard the tremor in Ethan's voice. I stood in front of my closet, my hand hovering over the dresses. I didn't choose the sensible, modest ones David had bought me. I chose a simple black silk dress Ethan had once said made my eyes look like emeralds. As I put it on, I felt like I was shedding a skin, leaving behind the ghost of Ava Thorne, and stepping into the shoes of a woman I barely recognized, a woman who was choosing to feel something anything other than numb. The hotel was nestled on a quiet side street, its entrance discreet and elegant. The air inside was warm and smelled faintly of jasmine and old leather. It felt like a world away from my life, a pocket of reality where the rules didn't apply. My heart was a wild bird beating against my ribs as the private elevator ascended. Ethan was waiting in the suite. The room was bathed in the soft golden glow of candlelight. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights glittered like a carpet of scattered diamonds. He hadn't just booked a room, he had created a sanctuary. He stood by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and when he turned to look at me, the expression on his face stole the breath from my lungs. It was a look of such profound reverence, of such raw, unshielded hope, that it made me feel both sacred and profoundly vulnerable. "Wow," he breathed, his eyes traveling over me. "You came." "You knew I would," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. I hoped, he corrected gently. He crossed the room and handed me a glass of whiskey. His fingers brushed against mine, and the familiar jolt was there, but this time it was 1,000 times more potent. "To a memorable birthday," he said, his voice low and husky as he clinked his glass against mine. The amber liquid burned a warm path down my throat, loosening the knot of fear in my stomach. Dinner arrived and we talked. We didn't talk about David or my marriage. We talked about us. We reminisced about our college misadventures, about the dreams we'd had, the people we'd become. With every shared memory, every burst of laughter, the tension in the room coiled tighter, the unspoken question hanging between us thick and heavy with possibility. The air itself felt charged, every molecule vibrating with a desperate energy. After dinner, we moved to the velvet couch near the window. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on his face, highlighting the earnest, worried line of his brow, the intensity in his dark eyes. He didn't touch me. He just watched me, his gaze so focused, so present, it felt like a physical caress. "Ava!" he began, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't have to do this. We can just talk all night and go home in the morning. I swear I'll never mention it again. I had to know you'd consider it. That I wasn't crazy for feeling this way." My mind screamed at me to take the out he was offering, to run, to protect the fragile shell of my life, to remember my vows. But my heart, so long dormant, was finally awake and beating with a fierce, undeniable rhythm. It was beating for him. I thought of the years of quiet desperation, of feeling unseen and unheard. I thought of the easy comfort of his presence, the way he could finish my sentences, the way his laughter was the only music that could drown out the silence in my head. "I've been feeling it too, Ethan," I confessed, the words tumbling out on a shaky breath. For a long time, I was just too scared to admit it. A universe of emotion passed through his eyes, shock, relief, and a hope so brilliant it was almost painful to look at. You have no idea how long I've waited to hear you say that. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was leaning in too drawn by a magnetic force I had denied for a decade. My fingers found their way to his cheek, my thumb stroking the rough stubble along his jaw. His skin was warm, real, and then I closed the remaining distance and pressed my lips to his. The first touch was hesitant, a soft, tentative question. It was a moment of pure disbelief, as if both our bodies were struggling to accept that this was real. Then, as if a dam had broken, the kiss deepened. His hands came up to cup my face, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones with a tenderness that made my knees weak. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a conversation we had been waiting 15 years to have. It was every unspoken, "I miss you," every lingering glance, every, "I wish you were mine," poured into one desperate, soul-shattering moment. It was a homecoming, a feeling of rightness so profound it eclipsed every ounce of guilt. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. His forehead rested against mine, his eyes closed. "I never thought," he started, his voice thick with emotion. "I never imagined it would feel like that." "Me neither," I whispered. A line had been crossed. There was no going back. The path I had been on for 12 years had crumbled into dust behind me. In its place was this man, this feeling, this terrifying, exhilarating new beginning. The rest of the night unfolded like a dream. Every touch was both a discovery and a memory. Ethan was gentle, patient, his every action radiating a kind of reverence and care I hadn't felt in years. He wasn't taking something from me, he was worshiping me. In his arms, I wasn't an unhappy wife having an affair. I was just Ava, seen cherished and devastatingly alive. We unraveled years of friendship and rewove it into something raw, passionate, and infinitely more profound. In the darkness of that hotel room, surrounded by the glittering lights of a city that didn't know we existed, I surrendered. I let go of the guilt, the fear, the ghost of my marriage. And for one night, I was simply completely his. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the window, I awoke to a feeling of profound peace, followed immediately by a tidal wave of panic. The reality of what I had done crashed down on me. The memory of the night, the taste of his lips, the weight of his body next to mine, the sound of him whispering my name was a vibrant, undeniable truth. But so was my wedding ring, cold and heavy on my finger. Ethan was awake watching me. There was no trace of regret in his eyes, only a deep, steady affection that made my heart ache. "Good morning," he said softly, his fingers gently tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. He didn't have to say the words. I saw it in the way he looked at me. This wasn't just one night for him. It was everything. "Ethan, I started, but I didn't know what to say. My mind was a tangled mess of joy and guilt. "I love you, Ava," he said, his voice clear and certain in the quiet room. "I think I have since the day I met you, last night. That was the most real thing that has ever happened to me. I know things are complicated. I know you need time. But I needed you to know that." His confession wasn't a burden. It was an anchor. It was the truth I had been subconsciously seeking for years. The feelings were mine too. They had been there all along, hiding in the safe shadows of our friendship. Fear coiled in my stomach. Fear of the destruction I would have to cause the life I would have to dismantle. But for the first time, the thought of the future wasn't a bleak, empty hallway. It was an open door. Terrifying, yes, but open. "I need time," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion, "to figure this out. what this means for my life, for David. He nodded, his expression full of a patience and understanding that I had never earned. Take it. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever you decide, I'm here. We sat in the quiet of the morning, the city waking up below us. The choices ahead were monumental, laden with pain and uncertainty. But in that moment, sitting beside him, I felt a sense of clarity. The greatest lie hadn't been the one I told my husband by coming here. The greatest lie had been the one I'd been telling myself for 12 years, that a life without love was a life worth living. My marriage wasn't a sacred vow to be honored. It was a prison of silence I had finally found the courage to escape. The path forward would be a demolition. It would require a strength I wasn't sure I possessed. But as I looked at Ethan, at the man who had seen me when I was invisible, I knew I wouldn't be walking it alone. For now, that was enough. This story is about more than just a broken vow. It's about the devastating, beautiful, and terrifying moment you realize the life you are living is no longer your own. It's about the courage it takes to listen to the whisper of your own heart over the roar of your obligations. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt trapped between loyalty and your own truth, then make sure you subscribe to Forbidden Hearts. We tell the stories that live in that complicated space, and let us know in the comments below, what would you risk for a single moment of absolute truth? Join the conversation, and we'll see you in the next story.